will be universally applicable and we hope valuable. It is with thanks that I'd like to introduce Dawn Scott.
All right, thanks, Jeanne. How's everybody doing this evening? Okay, seriously, that was terrible. How are we doing this evening? Good. Well, again, my name is Dawn Scott. I am the Director of Financial Aid at Carroll University, just down the street. But just to reiterate, I want everybody to know that I'm not here representing Carroll. I am here representing financial aid and folks going off to send their students off to school. So please know that this isn't anything to do with private schools. All of the information that I'm going to have for you tonight ranges from private schools, public schools, technical colleges, whether it's in Wisconsin or in Florida for that matter. All of this information will apply. So please know that going in. I'm a very informal person. It tends to be who I am. So if at any time you have any questions, or if I say something that didn't make sense and you want some clarification, please stop me. We have about an hour to go through the presentation. But what's really important to me is if you have a question, that we get that question answered. You all have a copy of the presentation in your folder. The last 6 or 10 slides are really informational purposes. So again, what's important for me is that if you have a question, that you get that question answered. If you have a question that's a bit more personal in nature that you don't want to ask in the crowd, I'm more than happy to stay after and ask any personal questions that you may have. And in addition, at the end of the presentation, there is my contact information, my phone number and my email address, as well as the colleagues that work in my office. Again, it doesn't matter if your student is looking at Carroll. If you have a financial aid question, that's what we're here for. So please feel free to reach out to me if you have any financial aid questions. We'd be glad to help you with anything that you may have. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. So what are we going to talk about tonight? Well, I know it's not the most exciting information, but hopefully we'll find it very informative and helpful when sending your student off to college with any of those financial aid questions that you might have. So we're going to talk about what is financial aid. Where does it come from? What types of financial aid is available? We're going to define financial aid, financial need, which is something you'll hear a lot about. We're going to talk about that FAFSA form, the free application for federal student aid. How many of you have heard of that? Fabulous. If you haven't heard of it, you will know all about it by the end of tonight. We're going to talk about how to avoid some of the common problems or errors that you might see, and then where to look for some additional information when applying for financial aid. So let's start with the basic. What is financial aid? Financial aid is any money that's available to you and your family to help pay for educational expenses. So there are 4 types of financial aid broken into 2 categories. The first category will be your favorite kind. Okay, anytime you see the word scholarship or grant, you're going to know that that's free money that your student has earned to help pay for educational expenses. Okay, so again, favorite kind, free money, something your student has done already to earn those funds. Typically, scholarships are going to be based on merit. And what I mean by that is it's going to be based on something they have done, whether it's an academic scholarship based on their ACT or academic performance, whether it's based on extracurricular activities or athletic abilities, might be based on an essay that they wrote or an interview that they did, but it's all something that they've accomplished based on something that they've done based on merit. And then we have grants. Again, another free form of financial aid, but is typically based on a family's financial situation. Okay? Not always. Sometimes they're a combination of academics and financial, but it's typically based on something financial from your family's situation. Okay, so again, scholarships and grants, free money your student has earned to help pay for those expenses. The second category is self-help. Not quite as attractive as that free money, but still a big part of that financial aid puzzle. And that's going to come in the form of student loans or parent loans or campus employment. And basically what that means is that your student has to do something in order to get those funds. If it's campus employment, that means that they're going to have to work on campus and earn an hourly wage and then pay for those educational expenses. And if it's loans, student or parent loans, unfortunately it means it has to be paid back after that student graduates. So it's something your student still needs to do to be able to get those funds. So again, 4 types of financial aid. You should always be told what types of financial aid you're getting. We'll talk a bit more about that when we show a demonstration of a financial aid award. And hopefully you're seeing a combination of all of these things when you're looking at the financial aid awards from the schools. Okay? So this slide right here, it's kind of hard to see and I'm sorry, but this is my favorite slide. So it's basically telling families where financial or how the cost of education is being paid for. Okay, so you can see that the largest portion of 29% is coming from grants and scholarships. So that's the good news. That means that 29% of how students are paying for college is based on that free money. Okay, so that's good news. The other second closest is parent savings and income at 28%. Okay, but you can kind of see a piece of that puzzle and how that works with putting the financial aid picture into perspective when you're looking at how you're going to pay. My favorite category is the 4% that comes from relatives and friends. Okay, who has those, right? Because if you don't know who they are, we need to figure that out so that they can help. Okay, so now that we know what financial aid is and we know what types they are, where does it come from? Well, there are 5 main sources of where your financial aid is going to come from. It's going to come from the federal government, the state government, the institution that you're looking at, your community programs, or your national programs. Okay, so there are 5 different places that you're going to look for financial aid. There's good news here. Okay, you don't have to apply to all 5 of those different places. By completing that FAFSA application that we're going to talk about, you're essentially saying to the school, hey, what do I qualify for from the federal government, from the state, and from your institution? So you do that one FAFSA form, and you check off those 3 things. Okay, now it's in our court. Now we have to tell you what you qualify for from the federal government, the state, and from our school. Okay, so that's the good news. So you're going to take care of those 3. Then there are still community and national programs. And those are just that. There are scholarship programs that you are going to be looking for to help pay for that educational experience. So for community programs, and these are going to be the nicer or the easiest of the 2, you're going to look in your community to see what scholarships your student may qualify for in your local community. So from your high school, I'm sure that you've gotten either web notes or announcements or flyers that talk about scholarships, scholarship opportunities. Let me stop and ask, how many of you are not senior families? Like, so your student is a senior. Okay, quite a few of you. That's fantastic. So you're like here early and getting a head start, so that's wonderful. So a lot of the dates and things that you're going to hear me talk about apply specifically to senior students and families, but obviously if you're a junior family, we're just going to add a year on to that, okay? So for senior families, you're going to want to start looking into those community scholarships right now. I always tell our students, now is the time to keep eyes and ears open, okay? If you walk into Culver's, make sure you're looking to see if they say something about a scholarship, okay? You want to just look wherever it is that you're going to see if there are any scholarships available to you in your local community, whether that's where mom or dad works. Maybe the student has a job and they can look into if they have a scholarship there. Maybe it's your church, your civic organizations, your Lions clubs, your Elks clubs. You want to tap into all of those resources to see, hey, do you have any scholarships for students in our community when they're going off to college? Okay, a great thing to do. You're going to really start looking at that between now, and each school is going to be different, but probably around February or March 1st is when you're going to see the bulk of those. Okay? And then we have national programs. And national programs are the same thing as community programs, only instead of competing with students in your community, you're competing with students nationwide. But again, a great form of, or a great resource to be able to look into those options to see what might be available to you. And there are some reputable websites listed up here, and they are basically scholarship searches. Okay, so you're going to go online and you're going to enter your information, who you are, where you're from, what your major is, what color hair you have, those types of things. And it's going to filter and do a search of what scholarships you might qualify for. I was at a presentation where a gentleman was speaking to me and saying, you know, if you're encouraging students to apply for outside scholarships, you really should be telling them they need to apply to at least 2 dozen. Okay, so that's a lot of work, and I recognize that. You're a senior student, you've got a lot going on, and applying for an outside scholarship is probably just really time-consuming for you. But I really and truly believe that it's worth it. It's really worth it to take the time to look to see what things you might qualify for. Just at our institution this past year, our students have have received over $900,000 in outside scholarship money. That's money they earned on their own that they brought in to help pay for educational expenses. So it's a big chunk of money that students are eligible to receive. Okay. All right. So eligibility for financial aid. Where do we start with this financial aid process or this FAFSA form? Well, again, everybody is going to complete the FAFSA, the free application for federal student aid. This form is the same form that we all use. All institutions, again, private, public, technical colleges, and all schools nationwide. So we are all going to use the same federal form, the free application for federal student aid. And this is just a screenshot of what the FAFSA website will look like when you go there. And you also want to keep in mind that some institutions will require you to complete an additional application. So we're going to talk about the FAFSA form as that main financial aid form, and it really is just that. However, some institutions may ask you to complete something else. Okay, so let's, yes? That is correct. His question was, the question was, when you complete the FAFSA form, does it go to the universities? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but that's a great question. When you complete your FAFSA application, you're completing one FAFSA per year per student. And when you're almost done with the FAFSA form, you can list up to 10 schools that you want that information to go to. So you're going to list all of the schools that you want this information to go to. The Department of Education will then take that information and send it to those 10 different schools for us to be able to work with. Great question. Okay. Oh, there we go. Okay, sorry. So let's talk about some of the financial aid programs that are available. One of the things that we talked about was federal government, state government, and institution. So this slide itself will just talk about the federal government programs. You know, and unfortunately, we don't have enough time to go through all of the programs, but I just wanted you to hear those names so that you knew what was available from the federal government. And again, these are just some of the programs that are available from the federal government only. So you're talking about the Pell Grant, the SEOG, or the Supplemental Educational Opportunity Grant. Those particular grants are available to the neediest population. So from a financial aid perspective, a financial need perspective, it's going to go to the neediest population. And then there are some additional loan dollars that you'll see. You're going to hear a lot about these direct Stafford loans, Parent Plus loans that are available. We do have some slides at the end of the presentation that go over a little bit more about each of these slides so that you can have that information. And then there are some state programs available. So when you're completing the FAFSA form, again, you're saying, hey, state of Wisconsin, I want to know, do I qualify for any money to go to an in-state school? So typically there are residency requirements, which means you're a Wisconsin resident going to a Wisconsin school. Private, public, technical college, we all have a small part of that state budget to be able to give to our students to go to school. So every formula is a little bit different, and the amount that you could receive is a little bit different. Not everybody will qualify, though. It is based on financial need, and we'll talk a bit more about that FAFSA form. So not all students will qualify for this. But I can say from a private perspective and probably a public perspective as well, it's not going to just the neediest group of students. It's probably going to the needy up to the middle income families. Okay, so it's not just focused on that neediest population of students.
Is there reciprocity with Minnesota on that?
Her question was, is there reciprocity with Minnesota on the state grant? Unfortunately, there is not. Okay. So you may be eligible for financial aid, but you just don't know until you apply. I can't tell you, not so much in the recent years with the way that the economy has been, but I can tell you how many families have said to me, you know what, we make a nice income, and I'm just not even going to bother filling out the FAFSA form because I know I'm not going to get anything. Okay? Well, that may be true. However, every student, every family would qualify for a federal unsubsidized Stafford loan. Okay? Now, it may not be what that family wants. You know, so if they win the Powerball tonight, they should share. But if they win tonight, then you know, they don't have to fill out the FAFSA. But if they want their student to have the responsibility of borrowing a student loan, they do have to fill out the FAFSA. Okay, so a lot of times families think of financial aid as only the free money, and unfortunately it's not. It's that free money plus the loan money. So if you're one of those families who thinks it's not worth my time to do the FAFSA, I certainly can appreciate that. However, know that if you want your student to borrow a student loan or you're interested in borrowing a parent loan, the FAFSA form is required. Okay, so again, no matter what your income level is, if you are Bill Gates' daughter, you can fill out the FAFSA and still qualify for a federal unsubsidized loan. Okay? It is a free form, remember that, so it shouldn't take up too much of your time. How many of you have completed the FAFSA form before? A couple of brave souls. Okay. If I asked you to tell me how long it took you to complete the FAFSA, how long would you say? It's too many years ago. I like that because it probably took them a really long time because it was not very friendly back then, right? Anybody else fill it out recently? 2 to 3 hours.
Well, after you get your tax return information, you do part of it, and then once you actually do your tax return and have your real figures from that, then you have to go in and put those in.
Right, and I think she's right. You know, her original comment was it takes maybe 2 to 3 hours, but you do have to do some finagling with tax numbers and things like that, and we're going to go through that. I would definitely say that in the last 3 years, we have come a long way from the old FAFSA form. It was not easy as 1, 2, 3. Okay, not even 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. It was really not, it was a very complicated form. But we've really come a long way into making sure that this is an easy process for families to be able to complete. I would say on average right now, if you sit down to do the FAFSA application and you have your information in front of you, and you're computer savvy even just a little bit, it should take you somewhere between 20 minutes and an hour. Okay? Now, if it takes you longer than that, don't hold that against me. But, okay, so the FAFSA application, let's talk a little bit about that. The FAFSA application is about 108 questions that basically boils down to how many people are in your family, how many of those people are going off to college, how much do you as a student make, and do you have an income, and then parents, how much do you make and how much do you have in assets and savings. Essentially, 108 questions boils down to that. Okay? And it's going to determine something called an EFC, an expected family contribution. We're going to talk a lot more about that. Okay? One of the things that has been an initiative in the state of Wisconsin and across the nation, but specifically in the state of Wisconsin, is we find that a lot of families are really intimidated by this FAFSA form. It asks about income information. It asks about your assets. And some families are really intimidated by this form. And so what we have created, or the state of Wisconsin has created, is something called College Goal Wisconsin. And it happens in February. It happens to be February 23rd and 24th. And what we have is a variety of different sites around the state of Wisconsin where you can come, hear a very short presentation, and then you can go to a computer lab and work with a financial aid professional and complete your FAFSA application that day. So if that's something that you're interested in, just know that it is out there. You can visit the website. And again, it is a free resource to all families. If you want to go and just get some information, you can do that. Okay? So let's talk about that FAFSA form. The FAFSA application for senior families is not available until January 1st, 2013. Okay? So the senior family FAFSA is 2013-2014 FAFSA application. Okay, but again, it's not available for you until January 1st. Colleges may set some filing deadline and priority dates. So you're going to hear a whole bunch of information about when you should do the FAFSA, should you wait, how quickly should you do it. Okay? The common theme that you are going to hear is you should do the FAFSA as soon as you can because of 2 reasons. One, colleges have filing deadlines and priority dates, which means if you do the FAFSA after their deadline, you may not get financial aid to go there. Okay? The other reason is because some programs do run out of funding, and you want to make sure that that doesn't happen to you. So what I always tell my families is you want to do your FAFSA as soon as possible. That is very true. But you really want to take a spreadsheet in college A, B, and C and find out what is the FAFSA filing date of those different colleges so that you are always looking at the strictest? I'm not sure that that's a word. But the strictest deadline of those colleges so that you're making sure that if the deadline is March 1st, you're doing your FAFSA by March 1st. Okay, so you really want to make sure that you're doing that. In addition to that, as this lady had mentioned, it's going to ask you for tax information for 2012. Okay, well, it's available January 1st, but you need your tax information. So you're clearly not going to have your tax information on January 1st. So what do? Well, you have a couple of options. You can complete your FAFSA application by using estimated tax information. Or if you are someone who gets your taxes done maybe by February 15th or February 20th, you may just want to wait until you get your taxes completed and go ahead and do your FAFSA one time and one time only. But if you're someone who gets your taxes done in March or closer to April, then you probably want to go in and use that estimated information so that you don't miss out on any filing deadlines. Yeah, that's a great question, and we can definitely answer that right now. When you're completing a FAFSA application, you have to remember that there are 2 sections. It is a combination of both the parent and the student and the parent's information. So it is the student's FAFSA, and it is in the student's name, but there is a section for them to complete, and then there's a parental section for them to complete. In a divorced situation, you are going to only be including the information of the parent that the student has lived with more in the last 12 months. So if mom and dad are divorced and student lives with mom primarily, Mom's information would be listed on the FAFSA, and biological dad's information would not be listed at all. If student is living with mom, and mom is married to stepdad, mom and stepdad's information would be listed on the FAFSA, but again, biological dad's information is not listed. Okay, did that answer the question? Great. Anybody else have a question on that? All right. So when you're completing your FAFSA application, again, you just want to make sure that you're completing it as soon as possible so that you're not missing out on any funds. If you go ahead and you complete your FAFSA application and you use estimated numbers, you will need to go back in and update those numbers to be the most accurate numbers that you have when you do file your FAFSA. But that's completely acceptable. In addition to being acceptable, that also means that you've met the filing deadline, and then you can kind of move on and fix that information at your leisure. Okay? Again, the FAFSA application will also tell you what your EFC is, that expected family contribution. And that number is really important because it not only informs you what the government thinks thinks that you can afford to pay to go to school, it's also what we use to help determine a financial aid award for you. Yes?
I have two going off to college, and so I know you said they each get their own FAFSA, but will that be taken into consideration for the EFC?
It will. Yes, her question was she has two going off to college. She'll complete one FAFSA for child A and one FAFSA for child B. But when you're determining how many people are in your house and then how many people are going off to college, it will see that you have two in college, and it'll divide your EFC accordingly. Great question. Yes? I'm not going to be very popular, but no, it doesn't. The FAFSA application only asks for income and asset information. The good news is what they do is in their formula, which is really behind the scenes, but in their formula, they do calculate that every family, so an average family of 4 with one in college who makes $60,000, on average will have a house payment of $1,000 or whatever the case may be. So they do, it's not that they don't include it in their formula, but they don't ask you what your particular debt level or liability is. Yes? It does not, and I'm going to get to that, but I'm going to answer your question specifically. His question was for asset information. Does it ask for 401k and insurance, or 401k and retirement benefits? And it does not. You do not include those as benefits or as income assets. Okay? So what do you need to complete the FAFSA application? So you're sitting down to do the FAFSA application, and what forms do you need? Well, you're going to need student and parent social security numbers. You're going to need date of births. You're going to need the student's driver's license. And then you're going to need that tax return and W-2 information, either at the time that you're doing it for the first time or when you go back in to input that information. You'll also need to have some bank statement information because there's a question that'll ask you for cash savings and investments. So you'll need to be able to answer those types of questions. And we will go over what is and what is not an investment right now. Sorry, didn't know that was the next slide. So what are assets that are included on the FAFSA? So the things that they're going to be asking you for are things like stocks, bonds, CDs, mutual funds, the value of a second home that you may have up north or a cottage, any UGMA or UTMA accounts that you may have. 529 plans are very particular because a 529 plan is going to be included as an asset of the parent, not of the student. Okay, so if the parent has made a 529 plan for their student, they are going to include the value of that 529 plan on their FAFSA as a parent asset. Yes? Oh, good question. What if a grandparent has that 529 plan? You can dance because it does not need to be reported on the FAFSA at all. Okay, so if the 529 plan was created by a parent, or excuse me, a grandparent, an aunt, an uncle, a neighbor, a friend, one of those relatives, that 4%, then that does not have to be included as an asset. Yes?
Student was given stock by their grandma, but it's in the student's name, that would go on here.
You are correct.
Okay.
If a student receives stock from like a grandparent as a gift, it would be included as an asset. Yes? Yeah, the question is, what if they have a trust fund that they don't have access to until they're 25 or 24? Unfortunately, those have to be included as an asset as well. Man, you guys are not making me popular at all. All right. So here's, yes?
One more question. In a divorce situation like that, it takes into account the assets of the parent that's basically primary. There's a primary.
Yes.
How about if the other parent or the secondary parent has that education funding?
So the 529, let's say the student lives with the mom, but the dad has created the 529 plan and it's in his name for the student, it does not need to be included. That doesn't mean you should get divorced, okay? But it does not need to be included. Okay, assets that are not included on the FAFSA are things like the value of your home or your car or your boat, the value of life insurance policies, your retirement or pension funds, so your 401k plans. None of that has to be listed as a value, as an asset value on the FAFSA application. Okay? All right. So FAFSA on the web worksheet. A lot of you are familiar with doing things online and you're comfortable doing things online, but you kind of want to know what the questions are ahead of time. That's what I like to do. So there's a FAFSA on the web worksheet that is not currently available right now, but it will be very, very soon. And if you go out to the general FAFSA website, which I'm going to give you here in a few minutes, you can download the FAFSA on the web worksheet. You can print that off, and you can answer all of the questions on paper in the same order they're going to appear when you do the FAFSA form. Okay, so you know what questions are going to be asked. You'll have some help and some instructions to be able to give you some of that information so that when you sit down to do the FAFSA online, you'll already have all of those questions answered. Okay? This is a slide that talks about what we talked about at the very beginning about when you complete a FAFSA application, the student can list that information, or list up to 10 schools they want that information to go to. Okay, so this just talks a little bit about how the student is going to be able to do that. So why should students use FAFSA on the web? Well, there are a lot of really good reasons why students should be able to use FAFSA on the web. The paper version does still exist. However, I have to be honest, it's under lock and key at the Department of Education. You have to call a special number and request a paper FAFSA. So I'm hoping that nobody wants to do that they all want to do it online at the FAFSA.web website or FAFSA.ed website. So why should you complete the FAFSA online, or what are some of the benefits that you can look forward to receiving? Well, there are a lot of built-in and edit checks. So they're not going to let you make some of those common mistakes that that may have happened on a paper form. So that's going to help you. There's skip logic that's involved. So if a question doesn't apply to you, then they're going to allow you to skip that question, and they're not going to ask it when you're going through that FAFSA application. Really, the two biggest reasons why you should use FAFSA on the web, or why it is convenient to, is it's extremely fast compared to using the paper FAFSA. So if you were to do a paper FAFSA on March 1st, we would probably get the results of that paper FAFSA in the middle of April. So it takes about 6 to 8 weeks. If you do an online version of the FAFSA on March 1st and you send it to my school, I'll probably have it by March 3rd. Okay, so it takes about 2 to 3 days for us to be able to get that information. So it significantly cuts down the time that you are waiting to get some answers, that you are waiting to see if you can afford to send your student to that school or to school B, C, or D. The other option, or the other thing that's great about FAFSA on the web, is the ability to be able to use the IRS data retrieval. This is sort of a new feature that's been available for the last couple of years, that one of the questions, or one of the sections of questions, asks you to list your tax income information. And so what the government has found is, why don't we link with IRS and be able to have families go out and link that information directly onto their FAFSA. And you're allowed to use that when you do the FAFSA on the web, FAFSA on the web. So you're going to go out there, and when you get to the income information, it's going to say, do you want us just to go out to the IRS and get that information for you and then dump it back into your FAFSA? Okay, it's an optional tool that you can use if you're interested in, but it'll save you time and some of the errors that happen. And we're going to talk a bit more about the IRS data retrieval as well. This screenshot just kind of shows you and reminds you that there are student sections and there are parent sections of that FAFSA application. So just keep in mind that when you're completing that FAFSA application, it really is a partnership with the student and the parent. So these slides talk about that IRS data retrieval. Again, you want to remember that it is a voluntary tool. You do not have to use the IRS data retrieval, but it is very easy to use, and it does require less paperwork on the back end if you were selected for something called verification. Each school that, if a Department of Education selects you for something called verification, each school is required to get some documentation from you, meaning they are going to ask for an IRS tax transcript, which you would need to call the IRS or order a tax transcript to be able to provide that for us. But if you've used the IRS data retrieval, you don't need to do any of that because it's already verified by the IRS. So it saves some time on the back end if you use that IRS data retrieval. Okay? Typically, the IRS data retrieval, however, isn't available until around the first or second week in February. And it doesn't always work, meaning if you've done your taxes on February 5th and you go to do the IRS data retrieval on February 10th, that's not going to be enough time for the IRS to have that information. So it's going to require about a 2-week time frame of after you filed your tax returns electronically to when you can use that IRS data retrieval. So it does take a little bit of time for that information to go through. Yes? It will not, because it knows that it needs, the 2013-14 needs the IRS information from 2012. Great question. Okay? So again, this is just a reminder of some of the things that happen when you use the IRS data retrieval, a screenshot of what it will look like when you get there to do that retrieval. One of the other things that you want to keep in mind when you're doing the FAFSA application is it's required to have signatures. Signatures indicate that you have signed and you have given all of the information that you could, and that is all accurate, and that you've done it to the best of your ability. So it will require a student signature and a parent signature. And you are going to do that by form of a PIN number, a personal identification number. This is the website for the PIN number. It's pin.ed.gov. And essentially what you could think of the PIN number as your financial aid social security number, because it identifies you and it will always identify you. Okay, and what I mean by that is if you have a student who went to school 4 years ago and you have a PIN number when you completed that student's FAFSA as the parent, then this year when you're going to send your student off to school, you're going to use that same PIN number for your section of the FAFSA, because a PIN number represents you and it, again, always identifies you. That PIN number will serve as your electronic signature for the FAFSA. It will also serve as your signature for a student perspective if you're applying for your federal loans. It'll serve as the signature for that. And parents, if you choose to apply for a parent loan, again, it would serve as the signature for that. So it's the same PIN number that you will use sort of forever and ever. And again, it identifies who you are. If you forget your PIN number or lose your PIN number, you can always go back to this website and get another one. But it's just something that you're going to want to have when you sit down to complete the FAFSA application. So while the FAFSA isn't available until January 1st, the PIN website is up and running at all times. So if you're super excited about financial aid when you leave here tonight, you can go home and request a PIN number, and that's fine, you'll get it. If you forget to apply for a PIN number, when you sit down to do your FAFSA, you can get a real-time PIN number at the end of the FAFSA application. So don't worry, you can still get a PIN number. It's just sort of an easier process if you have it ahead of time, and then you can sit down and use that PIN number to sign your FAFSA. Yes? Yes, the question was if you are starting the FAFSA and you need to leave, can you go back and come back in and have a saved FAFSA information? And absolutely you can do that. Great question. Yes?
Colleges for 2-year programs, do you have to reapply for the next school after that, after the 2-year degree?
You will have to complete a FAFSA application every single year that your student is in school. So you'll reapply for FAFSA every single year that your student is in school. You got it. Okay? So once you've completed the FAFSA, sorry, yes? Yeah, that's a great question. Once you've completed the FAFSA application for, let's say, the 13-14 school year, it will be in there. Next year when you go back in, or for the 14-15 school year, it's going to bring up your saved FAFSA application and only make you populate that tax income information and the things that are specific to the 2013 year. But all of your address and social security number and date of birth, that will all be saved in there for you. Okay, great. So once you complete that FAFSA application, then what's going to happen is you are going to get something called a student aid report, or a SAR. So the Department of Education is going to send you this form electronically and tell you to go back out to the FAFSA and look at your SAR information. That SAR is going to inform you what your expected family contribution is. It's basically your way to look at that FAFSA application in a printout format and see if there are any mistakes that maybe you made, Maybe you want to add another school that you didn't originally have, and now you can go back into the FAFSA website and add that additional school. Okay, but it's your way to kind of glance and look at what that information is. Maybe you meant to say you made 50,000 and you accidentally said you made 500,000. Okay, we want to probably fix that. Okay, so this is your way to kind of find those errors. So let's talk about that expected family contribution. So now the government has told you what an expected family contribution is. What do you do with that, or what does that mean? Well, you want to remember that the FAFSA application is two parts, student part and parent part. So that EFC is combined of those two sections. A student contribution and a parent contribution equals the total estimated family contribution. Okay? And again, we talked about what it calculates and what's it used, and that's listed there. The thing to remember is that you're filling out one FAFSA per year per student. If you're looking at 5 different schools, we are all getting the same EFC, the same expected family contribution from you. Okay? So you're only filling out one FAFSA. The expected family contribution remains the same no matter what school you're looking at. There's a website down at the bottom. It's called FAFSAforecaster.com. If you're a junior family or a senior family who just wants to look at what the FAFSA looks like and what maybe your EFC might look like, you can go to the FAFSA forecaster and kind of play around and get an idea of what questions are going to be asked and what your EFC might look like when you do the FAFSA application. Okay? This is sort of the big ugly slide, is kind of what I call it. And it talks about the EFC and how it's determined. And I know that this information is sort of confusing and there's a lot of acronyms that are being thrown around, but I think there are some key pieces of information on this slide that I want you to be aware of before you leave tonight. So again, we talk about the expected family contribution as being that big contribution, broken down into parent contribution and student contribution. Let's look at the student contribution side. The student contribution side is very easy to figure out. The government is going to say that you can earn up to $6,130, and it's as though you didn't work. Okay, so it means zero. Anything after that $6,130, they're going to say 50% of that can be used for school, okay, from a student perspective. On the asset side, the government is going to say whatever you as a student have in assets, 20% of that can be used for college. Okay, so your student has $1,000 in savings, 20% of that is $200. I had to write this down because I do math really bad in front of people. So that's $200. So right now you know your EFC is $200. Okay, now let's say your student made $7,000 in income. Okay, again, the first 6301 doesn't count. So there is $870 left after that. I can't even read my own writing. And so $870, again, 50% of that is all we're going to use. So $435. So right now, the student contribution is the $435 plus the $200. So right now, your EFC is $635. Okay? Kind of easy to figure out, right? On the parent side, it gets much, much more complicated. Okay? And so I don't have any formulas for you. But the things to keep in mind is that the government, well, they don't ask you for your liabilities and your debt. They do take that into consideration. So they're going to look at how much does the parent make? How much do they have in assets and savings? How close are they to retirement? Does only one parent work, or does both parents work? How many are going to college? So if the parent contribution, if they take a look at that and they're going to say, well, they make so much in money or so much in income, and their assets are really going to be looked at anywhere between 0 and 12%. Okay? And what I mean by that is if you're an average family, let's just say you make $70,000 and you have $25,000 in savings. To be honest, your savings percentage will be 0. They won't even look at that. So while $25,000 is a whole lot of money to you and I, in this formula, it's not really going to be looked at. Okay? So up to 12% is what they're going to look at. But in a lot of cases, it's somewhere between 0 and 12%. So they're going to take whatever that parent contribution is, and then they're going to divide that by how many people are in school. Okay, so kind of going back to her original question. If that parent contribution comes out to be $12,000, and she has 2 students in school, $6,000 for one student, $6,000 for the other student. So then we'll take $6,000 plus the $635 we earned over here. So that family's contribution for that student is $6,635. Okay, does that kind of make sense? Yeah? Any questions? Yes?
So it doesn't matter what the cost of the college is, the percentage would stay the same?
is correct. And I'm going to show an example on that. That's a great question. Yes? It does not. When the FAFSA looks at the application, it is just looking at income, asset, number of people in family, and number of people of college. That's all that they're looking at when determining the EFC. Now, when it comes to us and we're determining financial need, which we're going to talk about in just a minute, that's when those types of things do matter. Okay? So let's look at cost of attendance, kind of going into both of the questions that you just asked. Every school has what's called a cost of attendance, and every school is going to be different. We all have a different cost of attendance. Whether you're looking at two different private schools, we're going to have significantly different cost of attendance. Cost of attendance is combined of two different things. There are direct costs and there are indirect costs. Direct costs are things that you're going to pay directly to the institution. Tuition, fees, room and board. Okay? Then there are indirect costs that the government says, well, you know, just because a student is going off to college doesn't mean they're going to stop brushing their teeth. So you need to build in a miscellaneous expense or a personal expense. So that's why you'll see things like books and supplies, transportation, and miscellaneous personal expenses. We come up with an average of what that would be for our student body. And it's going to be different. If we come up with an average of $1,200 of personal expenses, well, one student may shop at a really high-end salon and one may shop at the dollar store. So they're going to have different costs. So when you're looking at what does it cost you to attend an institution, you really want to look at direct costs. Tuition, fees, room and board. The same for all of the students. And then, of course, know that there are some additional costs that it will cost the student and the family to be able to send that student off to school. Okay? So we know what cost of attendance is now, and we know what expected family contribution is, and if we subtract the two, we get financial need. How much financial aid you need in order for that particular school to be affordable to you. So here's an example of how financial need is determined and how schools use that to determine a financial aid award. So we take the cost of attendance, and in this example, the expected family contribution that came back from the FAFSA was $10,000. Okay, so we have a school that costs $30,000. The expected family contribution is $10,000, which means the financial need of that family is $20,000. That's how much financial aid that family needs in order for that school to be affordable. In the bottom school, it costs $12,000. The FAFSA form, again, is the same no matter where you go. So your EFC is still $10,000. That school needs to come up with $2,000 in order for that school to be affordable to that family. Okay, so it doesn't always depend on the price tag of the school. It really depends on how well they meet your financial need. If we give you $20,000 in financial aid for that particular school, well, they've met the exact same need as the school that gave you $2,000. Because the government says that you can afford the same amount no matter where you go. Okay? All right. So now what do we do with that information? What is our role? Well, our role is to take that expected family contribution and determine a financial aid award for you. Okay? So we're going to use that depending on whatever available funds we have at our institutions, whatever the money is that you qualify from the federal government or from the state government. So here's an example of a financial aid award. Okay? What's really important about a particular financial aid award, or about any financial aid award that you're giving, is that you should always be told what the cost is, and you should always be told what types of financial aid you have been given. So if I had said to you, congratulations, here's a financial aid award for $21,700, the first thing that you should say to me is, well, what types of financial aid am I getting? Because you know there are 4 different types of financial aid. And if that was $21,700 of student loans, well, that's not a very good financial aid award. Okay, so you should always be told what the breakdown is. Am I getting scholarships, grants, loans, and employment? Or what types of financial aid am I being given? Financial aid timeline, what should you kind of be looking for from October through May? Well, October through December, you want to apply to the different schools that you're looking at. You want to get accepted to those schools if you're interested in those, visit those campuses, and see what merit-based academic information or athletic information they may have available to you so that you can start looking at that information. Then January through May, you want to complete your FAFSA application as soon as possible after that January 1st deadline, but not on January 2nd because I'm not going to look at it, so don't bother. Okay? You can do it a little bit after January 2nd. And then go ahead and watch the mail for your financial aid forms from the different schools. So while the FAFSA form is extremely important to do, and it's extremely important for you to complete, it really doesn't give you anything from a how much does it cost to go to that school perspective. It just tells you what the government says you can afford to pay. And then it puts it in the courts of the financial aid offices to come up with a financial aid award for you to be able to determine if that's affordable for you. Okay? So a lot of times families want to know, well, you know, I'm going to have my student move out, and so then I don't have to list my information on the FAFSA form. Okay? Or another common question is, well, I'm not going to claim my student on my taxes this year, so then he can be considered independent, so my information isn't required. Well, unfortunately, the government has their own standards of what makes a student dependent or independent, which really means listing parental information or not listing parental information. Okay? The government has come up with a series of questions, which we're not going to read through all of them, but it basically comes down to, are you married? Do you have a child? Are you a veteran of the United States Armed Forces? Are you homeless? Are you in a legal guardianship? Or are you an orphan or ward of the court? Essentially, those are the questions that make a student independent. So if a student can't answer yes to one of those questions, then parental information would be required. Okay? So tips for applying for financial aid. What should you look for in the upcoming months? Well, you want to meet your FAFSA deadline. Okay? So you want to apply as early as possible, absolutely. You want to find out what additional forms may be required from you at those institutions. Okay? Make sure that you're filing all of the forms that are required from you. You also want to know, what is my beginning cost before I get any financial aid? So how much do you cost if I didn't get any financial aid to walk through the door? Okay, you always want to know the beginning cost. Then you want to know, well, what is my ending cost, but only after free money? What is the true cost to me? And the way to find out what that true cost to you is by taking the beginning cost and subtracting free money. And that's what your true value of what you're going to be paying that institution, so that you're always comparing apples to apples. Okay, one of the common questions I got this past year more than ever before was a family would call and they would say, well, Dawn, we have 2 financial aid awards and yours is pretty good, but school B beat you by $2,000. So you gave me 10 and they gave me 12. And I'll say, okay, well, let's see what's going on here. I mean, it's possible, but let's see what's going on here. Well, okay, well, Dawn, how much do you cost? Okay, well, we cost $30,000. Well, how much does the other school cost? Well, they cost $40,000. Okay, so they cost 40 and gave you 12, and we cost 30 and gave you 10. We're still $8,000 cheaper. And while I know you all know that, when you're looking at all of these different financial aid awards that are different from all of the schools you're looking at, that's sort of really hard to see until you kind of say it out loud like that. Okay, so I always tell my students, create that spreadsheet. FAFSA deadline. Boom, boom, boom. Okay, what is required of me at that institution? What forms? Have that in your spreadsheet. What is their cost before financial aid? What is my free money? So that you are always comparing apples to apples. Financial aid in future years. That's another common thing. You are going to school, or your student is going to school for more than 1 year. So don't look at financial aid in the form of 1 year. If your student is going to a 2-year school, then look at the financial aid process in 2 years. You want to know, is it affordable for me today and tomorrow? Okay? Cost increases. Typically, cost increases will continue to happen at institutions, but financial aid typically doesn't go up. So you want to make sure that you know what that cost increase is, and can your family absorb that if you're required to do so. You want to know what payment plan options are available to you. Does the school that you're looking at offer payment plans? Do they allow you to make 12 monthly payments? Do they have an interest charge? Do they require a fee to be able to do that? Okay, those are things that you want to ask up front. Then there's the outside scholarship benefit. This is one of my biggest pet peeves. You always want to know what happens if I receive an outside scholarship, because schools can handle it 2 ways. School A can say, congratulations, here's $10,000 in free money from my school. And Sally can say, well, Dawn, I got $1,000 that I got from Target. Well, great. Now you have my $10,000 plus the $1,000 that you brought in from Target. So you now have $11,000 in financial aid. So you saved your family $1,000 by getting that scholarship. School B can say, well, the maximum free money you're eligible to receive is $10,000. So Sally can say, well, I got $1,000 from Target. And they can say, well, the maximum is $10,000, so now we'll give you 9. And then the $1,000 that you brought in equals 10. Super not fair, right? Because so what did Sally do? She just saved that school $1,000. I told you 40 minutes ago you had to apply to 24 of those. You should see the benefit of that. Okay? So again, not that it's going to be a make or break deal, but you want to know that going in ahead of time. What happens if I receive an outside scholarship? The good news is that most schools will give you the benefit. Okay, so that is definitely good news. Frequent FAFSA errors, and I'm going to kind of speed through because I know we're running short on time, but forgive me, but if you don't understand something, let me know or stop up afterwards. So some frequent FAFSA errors, parent-student social security numbers. You always want to remember that it is a student's FAFSA. So parents, I know you want to be helpful. I know it, okay? But if you sit down to do the FAFSA application and it says what is your social security number, they don't mean you. They mean your student, okay? So if you remember it's your students when it gets to the name part, but you put in your social security number, we have a big old problem. Okay, so remember, student and parent social security numbers need to be input correctly. Divorced or remarried parental information, I think we talked a little bit about that. Income earned, you do need to list the income earned by both the parent and or step-parent. And I'll kind of go down to the last one, not using real name. It's kind of funny, but it's true. If your name is Walter Smith and everybody knows you as Bubba, you should not list Bubba as your name on the FAFSA, okay? And while it's sort of funny to say that, it really, really happens, or if it's Jennifer and Jenny, that's probably more realistic. But when you do a FAFSA application, it does a number of checks. It does a selective service check. It does a Social Security Administration test. It does a Department of Homeland Security test. So if your name and date of birth don't exactly match that, it's going to fail that Social Security check, and it's really hard to clear up. Okay, so you just want to make sure you're answering all of that information as you know it. Okay, caution, avoid fees. The first F in FAFSA is free. The free application for federal student aid. You should never, ever, ever have to pay somebody to help you complete the FAFSA application. Okay, that doesn't mean, however, if you have a financial advisor or someone that you're already working with, absolutely, let them help you fill out the FAFSA. That's not a problem. I'm just saying you don't have to seek financial or help to be able to complete that FAFSA application. That's what we're here for. Okay, so reach out to us and let us know if you have any questions. FAFSA.gov. You really want to make sure that you are going to FAFSA.gov, not FAFSA.com or FAFSA.org. Because if you go to those places, you'll get to a really nice screen that pops up that says for $69.95, they'll help you complete your FAFSA. Okay, you're at the wrong site. We want to get you back to FAFSA.gov website. Okay, we are almost done. Special circumstances. One of the things to just keep in mind is that when you are completing your FAFSA application, you are talking to a computer. Okay, so they don't really care about you. They don't care about what's going on in your family situation. They just care about numbers. And that's all that they want. They don't ever want you to write them a letter because it doesn't go anywhere. Okay, but the people who do care about your special circumstances are the financial aid offices that your student is looking at. So if there are special circumstances that are not reflected on the FAFSA, you want to let us know, okay, so that we can do something for you. These are things like change in employment status. Mom or dad was laid off. Maybe they found a job, but it's at significant less pay. Medical expenses that are not covered by insurance. Okay, divorce or separation of parents. Expenses related to student disabilities. These are all things that we can take a look at for you to see if we can adjust some of the information that was listed on the FAFSA. One of the more common ones that we've seen in the last 5 or 6 years has been families who have lost jobs, but then take money out of their 401k plan to be able to help pay for expenses. Well, now they complete the FAFSA and they don't know that, and it looks like you made a whole bunch of money, when really you were just paying your mortgage and living. Okay, so we can take a look at that for you and take that information out so that it accurately reflects what your family was going through. Okay? So again, financial aid awards, look at that process in 4 to 5 years. This is the last slide we're going to go through. You always want to find out what's going to happen to my financial aid award in years 2, 3, and 4. Okay, again, you're not going to school for 1 year. So you want to know, am I going to get there with a really great financial aid package? And then sophomore year, I get a little bit less, and then junior year, I get even less than that. Okay, so find out what happens. Is my financial aid award going to stay the same and be consistent through the time that I'm at this institution? Find out those cost increases, which we talked about for tuition fees, room and board. And then again, we talked about find out what happens if your student receives that outside funding, okay, so that you're not missing out on anything that you have applied for and worked really hard for and then didn't receive the funding because of it. Okay? The last couple of slides that we are not going to go through, but this website, I just want to let everybody know that studentaid.ed.gov is a great website. It talks to us in plain English. It lets us know about some of those financial aid terms we talked about, so Stafford loans and direct loans and Pell Grants. So if you want to know some of the specific information, this is a really great website to be able to go to get that information. Okay? So with that, I know we have like 3 minutes. We can stay longer, of course, but I don't want people to stay very much longer. But does anybody have any questions that they'd like to ask? Yes? Yeah, the gentleman's question is, what if, in this situation, the cost of education is $30,000, but the financial aid award only totaled $21,700? How do they pay for the rest? Well, of course, that's going to come then as each family's circumstance will be different. Whether parents or students have money set aside in savings and assets that they're going to use for that. Maybe they're going to go on a payment plan to help pay for some of those expenses. Or if they have to, then they can look into some additional financing resources that are available. There are Parent Plus loans that are available that are in the parent's name. There are other alternative loan resources available to students that they can look into borrowing to help pay for those expenses. The federal, it's actually called the Direct Stafford Loan. Every student who fills out the FAFSA application will qualify for $5,500 in the federal Stafford loan, Direct Stafford loan. That's the most a student can get, however. So a lot of families think, oh, well, I can just borrow student loans from the federal government to pay for the entire cost of my education. Unfortunately, that's not the case. The government says you can borrow $5,500. And then as a sophomore, you can borrow $6,500. And then as a junior and senior, you can borrow up to $7,500. Okay, anybody else? Yes? Her question was, is Social Security checks or Social Security income considered on the FAFSA? Social Security benefits that are untaxed, so you received an amount less than what's required on a tax form, are not considered untaxed income for the FAFSA information, so you do not need to report that information. However, if you've received Social Security benefits that kind of slide over into the adjusted gross income on your tax return, it would be included as regular old income, but anything that's untaxed, you do not have to report any longer. Yes? The schools, the question was, if you took money out of a 401k and it shows up on the FAFSA as income, how do we adjust that? Each school does special circumstances differently. We all have our own form, but that is a really common one that we would just get some additional information from you, and then we can take that off of the FAFSA application, which would then, in essence, lower your EFC, your expected family contribution. Yes? Mm-hmm.
Do you get financial aid award letters from all 10 of those, or is it only from colleges and schools that you actually apply?
Great question. His question was, you can list up to 10 schools on the FAFSA application to get your FAFSA information, but do you get a financial aid award from all of those schools? You do typically have to apply to those schools and be accepted before a school will issue a financial aid award for you. So if you haven't applied to that school or haven't sent them information, like at our institution, if that happens, we get a FAFSA information, we'll reach out to you and say, hey, Sally, thank you for submitting your FAFSA, but we don't really know anything about you yet. So apply to our school, and then once you do, we'll issue you a financial aid award. Yes? You are a super, super smart group. These are really great questions. His question was, are grants and scholarships considered income next year when you're completing your tax information? 98% of the time it is not. The only time that you would report grants and scholarships as an income on next year's taxes is if you went to school, tuition and fees were paid completely by your grants and scholarships, and you got money back. So if tuition and fees equal $10,000 and your grants and scholarships equal $12,000, that $2,000 extra would need to be reported as income. Yes?
If we submit with estimates, are you going to get that, or does it not go to you until the final number?
We get everything you submit. So if you submit it with estimated numbers and you hit send or submit, we will get that information. And then most of the time, it's going to be us bugging you to go in and update that information. And we'll say, thank you, Larry, for going ahead and completing your FAFSA application, but we need you to go in and update that information at some point. Great question. Yes, if you go in on February 1st and you use estimated information and then you file your taxes on February 10th and then you wait until the end of the month, let's just say the end of February, you can then use the IRS data retrieval absolutely at that time and it'll pull that information in. Most schools, private schools are quicker about getting out their financial aid awards than public schools. So most of the private schools are going to start doing financial aid awards probably February 1st through February 15th. And most state schools aren't going to do financial aid awards until typically like April and May. Okay? So when we're talking about going out to do the FAFSA right away in February 1st, well, that's great, and we want you to do it so you don't miss out on any funding. Really, it's just sitting in a pile on the back of my desk because I'm not doing anything until around February 1st. Okay? You can do the FAFSA after January 1st. And then, but typically we don't start doing our financial aid awards or reviewing that information until February, from a private school perspective. State schools are a little bit later than us. But it's available to you anytime after January 1st, 2013. Okay, yes?
You were talking about the 0 to 12% percentage that they use for the parents' income and assets. Is that based on gross pay or taxable income or adjusted gross income? Just curious because when I did mine last year, it came out to about 18% of gross pay. So we did not qualify for anything. And I was just shocked that they thought that families have 18 to 20% of their gross pay available to pay for someone's college. Most people don't.
Right. The 0 to 12% is really based on the asset information, not necessarily on the income information. So they're going to take a percentage of your income and assume that you can afford a certain amount, and then they're going to take a percentage of your asset information. And you know what? She's right. It is a very, well, I have to say it's a great product because it's what I do. It's really not. It's very, very, it makes it assume that families can afford more than I think they technically can pay. If I were to do the FAFSA right now, my EFC would be like $22,000. Really? How am I going to come up with $22,000? Now, granted, my sons are only 3.5 years old, but that's scary, and I certainly do respect that and understand that, and it is not always a real accurate picture of what a family can afford, and that's why I always tell families, don't panic when you see the EFC. Wait until you get the financial aid award from the school that you're looking at, and then panic, or decide that it's affordable or not affordable. Okay? Yes? Yeah, typically your merit-based scholarships are going to come from the institution or from your community or your national programs because those are all based on merit, something your student has done to earn it. You got it. All right. Well, thank you very, very much for your time. Again, my contact information is at the very end, I think, right? I gave it to you. Oh. My phone number is not on there. If you are interested in it, I'd be glad to give it to you. It's 262-524-7297. That's my direct line. So again, if you have any questions about the financial aid process at all or you need any additional help, please feel free to call my office. I'd be glad to help you with anything that I can. It's 262, I say it fast so you can't write it down, 262-524-7297. Okay? Thank you so much and have a great evening.